First, though, the battle over extreme vetting continuing this morning. The Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals is still deciding the fate of President Donald Trump's executive order, which restricts travel from 7 mostly Muslim countries. Trump tweeted earlier today saying, quote, "If the U.S. does not win this case, as it so obviously should, we can never have the security and safety to which we are entitled. Politics." The 3 judges, one appointed by a Republican, the other 2 appointed by Democratic presidents, heard the arguments last night.
The order also temporarily halted refugee program. This judgment was well within the president's power as delegated to him by Congress.
To prove religious discrimination, we do not need to prove that this order harms only Muslims or that it harms every Muslim. We just need to prove that it was motivated in part by a desire to harm Muslims. And we have alleged that.
I want to bring in right now Fox News senior judicial analyst, Judge Andrew Napolitano. Judge Napolitano, good to see you.
Good morning.
I want to know what you anticipate from this decision, obviously, but
well,
just what that judge just said, prove that there was a desire to hurt all Muslims?
That was the argument by the Solicitor General of Washington, which is, in my view, an inaccurate statement of the law.
I agree.
Let me give you a couple of basics. Lyndon Johnson used to say there's 2 things you never want to see being made: sausage and legislation. You should add to that judicial decisions, because you can't always tell where a judge is going to go from her or his questioning during oral argument. Having been there, I can tell you often, in order to prove a point and show your sense of fairness and your understanding of the law, you will grill more aggressively the side you're eventually going to rule in favor of. I don't know if that's what happened last night, but I do know that the grilling of the federal government lawyers was far more aggressive, and they seemed to be far less prepared than the than the other side. Now, this is not a beauty contest. It doesn't go to the more articulate lawyer. It's supposed to be resolved on the law. So there's 2 issues before them. Do the states have standing to bring this case? Can the states show that they suffered some injury in fact by Donald Trump's executive order? I think the answer to that is no. You can't sue on behalf of somebody else. Second, did Judge Robart properly restrain the President of the United States from prosecuting foreign policy, an area given exclusively and expressly to him under the Constitution? Instead of dwelling on that, they asked questions like, what evidence is there connecting these countries to terrorism? That is irrelevant. The president makes that determination, and he can't be second-guessed by the courts.
But does it show that those, and I listened to a lot of these arguments, which were done over the telephone. How hard is that?
Well, the reason it's done over the telephone is the judges were very far apart. One was in Phoenix, one was in San Francisco, one was in a great gig, Honolulu.
Yeah. But to your point, there were 2 of the top defenders who were set to argue on behalf of the Justice Department, who had to step aside because they previously worked for Jones Day, the law firm that was working on the opposing the travel ban.
Well, that's the law firm that Donald Trump hired before he was the president of the United States and before he had the Justice Department to write these executive orders for him. And apparently this law firm, we don't know the human beings involved, advised him as president-elect, this is what we suggest you sign once you're sworn in. And 8 days after he was sworn in, he signed it. Whether it was ever actually vetted by Justice Department lawyers, we don't know.
I mean, if it is, it's not blocked or it's ruled, they rule in favor of it. Do you think that the opposition goes away? I don't think so. What else would people do to try to stop it? I don't see it the opposition going away.
I think there's a blood feud against Donald Trump. From the left, growing in volume, I know that's growing in size, that hates almost everything he does. Not only is he doing what he promised to do, he's doing what the statute precisely authorizes him to do, to suspend immigration for national security purposes, not based on free speech, not based on religion, but based on place of origin. It's crystal clear in the law he can do this.
And I also don't understand how the judge representing Washington State could say that there was a desire to hurt Muslims. Generally speaking, I don't know how you get there.
You don't know anyone's desire.
How do you get there? Right.
I have probably participated in thousands of oral arguments as either a lawyer or a judge, and I have never heard one where comments made during a political campaign were suggested as evidence. So they took words used by Donald Trump candidate, Rudy Giuliani, introducing Donald Trump, and claimed that those words were the motivations for a lawful act of the President of the United States. That's a disconnect. That's irrelevant.
Meanwhile, the President and Homeland Security Secretary John Kelly continued to defend the executive order yesterday. Here's what they had to say.
We're going to take it through the system. It's very important. It's very important for the country, regardless of me or whoever succeeds at a later date.
What was done at the counters, so to speak, and at the very many airports where people coming in the United States, everyone was treated humanely. I've read the reports about people standing up for hours on end. Didn't happen. That people were insulted. I guess insults are in the eyes of the beholder. Going forward, I would have certainly taken some time to inform the Congress.
But the way he explains the impact is very different than what we heard, broadly speaking, in the media the day after. Does this go all the way to the Supreme Court?
Well, yes and no. If the president loses, if this three-judge panel decides to keep the temporary restraining order in place, the temporary restraining order trumping, so to speak, the president's executive order, I think the president has to go to the Supreme Court to uphold the dignity and the authority of the presidency. But if the restraining order is vacated, I don't think that the states will, I don't think the Supreme Court will hear the states. They will want Judge Robar to try the case first. Supreme Court does not like to get involved in the earliest stages of a case unless somebody is frustrating one of the branches of government, as this judge is frustrating the foreign policy of the president.
It makes sense.
Yeah, Judge, you touched on something about intent. Intent doesn't matter in this instance, right? The president's authority is his judgment to exercise it in any way he chooses to, as long as it's consistent with our Constitution.
I think and I thought he made a great argument, but I think he threw a curveball. This is the solicitor for the state of Washington, the lawyer representing the state of Washington, when he made the argument that you just so nicely summarized. Intent does come into play, but not in immigration. Intent comes into play when you write a statute that looks like it's fair in its face, but you really want to discriminate against people because of race, say in voter ID or in gerrymandering. But when the president prosecutes foreign policy, his intent is irrelevant. It's his determination and his determination alone how to keep the nation safe. And it is that determination with which this federal judge is interfering.
You've always said that when you put on that robe, that your mindset changes, that you adhere to the law, you're a guardian of the law. Was there evidence in what you heard yesterday in that appeals hearing that those judges are not behaving or thinking that way?
Yes, I'm sorry to say yes, and the evidence was in the questions. That were asked. What was the president's motivation? Why do we need to have this extreme vetting? Isn't existing screening acceptable? None of those questions is relevant to whether or not Washington has the right to bring the case and Judge Robar has the right to restrain the president. Those things may be relevant in a trial on the merits. They are not relevant in this proceeding as to whether or not Donald Trump gets to secure the borders.
Well, Judge, most Americans don't know this, but even U.S. citizens, when we're coming into the country, before we are admitted back into the country, we don't even have our constitutional rights to search and seizure and others, right? Doesn't Customs have very broad authority in even vetting U.S. citizens?
It pains me very much to concede with that, to agree with that, because I profoundly disagree with the law. But yes, there are areas of the country where, for national security purposes, the government has extraordinary authority. However, once an alien is here, even in a holding facility at JFK, they acquire rights because the Constitution, the basic constitutional rights apply. So did aliens, people trying to get in the country, sue in this case? No. The state of Washington sued. And I was waiting for a question from one of the judges to the lawyer representing the state. Can you please tie in the harm to the government of the state of Washington caused by this executive order? It's a fanciful argument. So they say some of the companies that work in the state of Washington are denied a pool of foreign high-tech talent. What companies? Microsoft. Microsoft. The state of Washington is suing for Microsoft. Microsoft could buy the state of Washington if Starbucks were willing to sell it.
Those 100 tech companies, less than 1% of their employees are affected by this ban.
This is really important.
It's political.
Less than 1%.
It's political. It's branding. It's about that. It's not about actually changing anything.
I think that people have a core belief that we are a nation of immigrants, and therefore everyone should be welcome here. I think that's what the fight is. You know?
Judge Andrew Napolitano, good to see you.
Pleasure,
Thank you,
guys.
sir. We'll be right back.